63 million names. Every person living in the United States in 1890. Their address, their family, their age, whether they owned their home, whether they could read, where they came from. If your great-great-grandmother came from Poland in 1888 and settled in Chicago, her name was in there. Her husband, her children, the language she spoke at home, the streets she lived on. All of it. Gone. And almost nobody remembers it ever existed. Not lost, not misplaced, destroyed. By order of Congress. By a clerk who looked at 63 million human beings and wrote 4 words, no further value. And the building designed to protect records exactly like these, it opened 2 years later. By 1890, the United States Census had become the largest data collection project any country had ever attempted. For the first time, the census used electric tabulating machines, invented by a man named Herman Hollerith. His machines made it possible to count 63 million people faster than anyone thought possible. The company he built around those machines would eventually change its name to IBM. The machines that counted those names became the foundation of one of the largest corporations in history. The data those machines processed no longer exists. The 1890 census was stored on paper schedules, handwritten forms organized by state, by county, by household. The originals were the only copies. No backup, no duplicate, no microfilm. Nothing. I want to pause on that. The most comprehensive snapshot of America at the end of the 19th century. A country in the middle of the greatest wave of immigration in its history. The exact decade when 250,000 children were put on trains and sent across the country with no records. And they made 1 copy. On January 10, 1921, a fire broke out in the Commerce Department building in Washington, D.C. The fire damaged a portion of the 1890 census records, not all of them, a portion. The official report stated that approximately 25% of the schedules were damaged by fire and water. That's bad, but it means 75% survived. I don't dispute the fire. Fires happen, buildings burn. What I dispute is what happened after the fire. Because the surviving records weren't copied, they weren't photographed, they weren't moved to a safer location. They were bundled, stored, in a damp basement in another building for 12 years. Nobody touched them. Nobody transcribed them. Nobody thought to preserve the most detailed record of late 19th century America while it slowly rotted in a government cellar. For 12 years, they sat there, getting worse. And then, in 1933, Congress authorized their destruction. Not the damaged ones. All of them. Every surviving schedule from the 1890 census. The 75% that the fire never touched. The authorization came from the chief clerk of the Bureau of the Census. The records were described as, and I'm quoting from the official memorandum, having no further value to the federal government or to any other agency or individual. No further value. 63 million names. The only record of where millions of Americans lived, who they married, how many children they had. No further value. The destruction order was signed on February 21, 1933. And 1 day later, the cornerstone was laid for a new National Archives building in Washington, a building designed specifically to preserve government records of enduring value. February 21, destruction of 63 million names. February 22, a cornerstone for the building that was supposed to protect them. Now, I'm not going to tell you this was a conspiracy. I don't believe it was. What I believe is something quieter, and maybe worse. Nobody fought for these records. There was no public outcry, no congressional debate, no newspaper editorials, no genealogist chaining himself to the basement door. The records were pulped. The paper was recycled. And the most important decade in American demographic history became invisible. Not because someone planned it, but because nobody thought the people in those records mattered enough to fight for. And that tells you something about how a country decides who gets to have a history. So let me show you the pattern. The 1890 census, the Orphan Train placement records from the Children's Aid Society, the Convict leasing ledgers from Alabama and Georgia, the intake files of the New York Foundling Hospital. Different institutions, different states, different systems. Same decade, same gap. I'm not saying someone planned this. I'm saying when records disappear, they don't disappear randomly. They disappear from the people who couldn't afford to protect them. Today, genealogists call the 1890 census the brick wall. If you've ever tried to trace your family tree and hit a dead end somewhere between 1870 and 1995, this is why. The records that would have connected your 1880 ancestors to your 1900 ancestors don't exist. The National Archives estimates that only 6,160 individuals from the original 63 million can be identified from surviving fragments. That's 0.01%. 99.99% of the 1890 census is gone. Think about what that means. That woman from Poland who arrived in 1888, the census would have been the bridge between her ship manifest and the 1900 census. Her address, her husband's occupation, how many children she had by then, whether she spoke English. That bridge is gone. And it's not just gone for her family. It's gone for 63 million families.
And here's the thing about that. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in 9 steps, over 60 years, each one completely unremarkable. 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroys city records. 1990, the census is taken, 1 copy, no backup. 1900, the new census is taken. The 1890 data sits in storage. 1914, World War I, priorities shift. 1921, fire at the Commerce Department, 25% of the 1890 records damaged. 1921 to 1933, the surviving records sit in a damp basement. Nobody copies them. 1933, February 21, Congress authorizes destruction of all remaining 1890 records. 1933, February 22, 1 day later, the cornerstone for the National Archives is laid. 1935, the National Archives opens, its mission to preserve government records of enduring value. 9 events, spread across 60 years, each one completely ordinary on its own. And not one of them required a conspiracy. That's what makes this harder to accept than a conspiracy. The 1890 census wasn't classified. It wasn't hidden behind a vault. It was destroyed because someone looked at 63 million names and wrote 4 words, no further value. The building that was supposed to protect records like those opened 2 years later, and inside it, on the very first day, there was already a gap. 63 million people wide. If your family tree stops around 1890, now you know why. And if it doesn't stop there, you're one of the lucky ones. The fragments that survived, all 6,160 of them, are searchable at the National Archives. If your family was there, you'll know within minutes. Records can be destroyed by fire, or by order, or by 4 words on a form. But there are other ways to erase a person. 40,000 Americans discovered that in the 1940s. The man who did it won a Nobel Prize. That story starts with an ice pick.